بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. We have the 4th century of the Hijrah, not the 3rd century, not the 5th, but the 4th century, approximately 400 years after the Hijrah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And the scholar, the Imam, the personality that I chose and I wanted to share with you, my brothers and sisters, for Allah's sake, is al-Haafidh ad-Daaraqutni, Imam ad-Daaraqutni, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was born in the year 306 and he died in the year 385 of the Hijrah, which is translated or converted into the common era 918 to 995. Now, within 30 minutes, to be honest and to be frank, especially with such a mixed and diverse crowd, an audience on so many different levels of background, of education, of understanding, it's considered to be an act of oppression. And it's considered to be unfair to these great ulama, these great champions of Islam, the scholars of Hadith and others, to run through their lives and try and attempt to run through their lives, their feats, their praiseworthy efforts, what they left behind within half of an hour. However, مَا لَا يُدْرَكُ كُلُّهُ لَا يُتْرَكُ جُلُّهُ. If you can't do everything, then at least do what you can, as they say. مَا لَا يُدْرَكُ كُلُّهُ لَا يُتْرَكُ جُلُّهُ. You can't get it all, you can't do it all, then at least do what you can. So by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're going to try, we're going to attempt, we're going to ask Allah to make it easy to shed a little bit of light on this great Imam and on this magnificent period in the history of the Muslims. And that is al-Qarn al-Rabi', the 4th century of the Hijrah, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once again, for those who have heard of this Imam, those who haven't, for the first time, his name, commonly or colloquially known as ad-Daaraqutni, Imam ad-Daaraqutni, rahimahullah ta'ala. So let's get started, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. On our first slide, bi'idhnillah, we have the 4th century, elements of influence. Number 1, living in the cool shade of the golden era, which preceded it. Number 2, continuation and further advancement of the larger-than-life efforts which were put forth in the previous century. Then we have number 3, lack of complacency and stagnation. Then we have number 4, refinement and perfection of the previous styles. And we have number 5, remoteness from blind following, at-taqlid al-a'ma, bigotry and fanaticism. And last but not least, we have insatiable thirst, an endless quest for knowledge, especially prophetic hadiths. So, why did we make this introduction or this preface? Obviously, there is a cause and then there is an effect. Everything in life, in Islam and outside of Islam, nothing happens haphazardly. Nothing happens and takes place by accident. The Imams in the 4th century, they were Imams because of those who came in the 3rd century. What they did, what they put forth, what they wrote about, what they discussed, obviously had a direct influence on the scholars of the 5th century. وَهَكَذَا. So there's always a cause and there's always an effect. There is a trailblazer. There is someone who blazes the path, who walks first, who chops down the trees, who smooths the road. And then there are those who come after the initial trailblazer. And they don't do what he did. Rather, they carry on his efforts. They refine, they synthesize, they smooth out the efforts of the initial blazer of the trail. And this is crucially important to understand when we speak about history in general, let alone Islamic history, let alone the exquisite art of Hadith. Why did Imam al-Bukhari write his book? Who influenced him? Who taught him? Who gave him a suggestion? Who criticized him? Why did the students of Imam al-Bukhari write their books? Who influenced them? Who taught them? Who criticized them? Who did they differ with or agree with, and etc. So if you don't have this cause and effect, if you don't have this head and tail, if you don't have the trailblazer and the one who comes afterwards, there lies no doubt one of the following things is going to happen to you when you read history, let alone Islamic history, and let alone when we talk about hadith science. Number one, at best, you're going to get minimum benefit. And this is at best, minimum benefit. At worst, you're going to become confused, lost, and you may even have bad thoughts and ill suspicions about some of those ulama, because you don't know what took place and what happened after them, what did they leave behind. So therefore, the scholars of the 4th century and our Imam ad-Daaraqutni rahimahullah ta'ala, why was he such a great Imam? Why did I choose him? What influenced him? What led to his greatness and awesomeness? We said number one is that this scholar and his brethren and his sisters, all of the ulama, men and women, they lived in the cool shade. Not a shade, but it was a cool shade of the 3rd century. And anyone who studied anything about the compilation of the Sunnah, the history of the recording of the Hadith, how the Hadith culture began to move into full swing, he knows or she knows that the 3rd century was al-Asr al-Dhahabi, al-Qarn al-Dhahabi. They call it the golden era. In other words, the best of the best, the biggest of the biggest, the strongest of the strongest, they lived and they died in the 3rd century. The most major books, most important books concerning hadith, they were put together and they were crystallized in that 3rd century. Where do you go? Imam Ahmad, Imam al-Bukhari, Imam al-Tirmidhi. These are just 3 from among hundreds of ulama who wrote books in that 3rd century. Every single Muslim, if you ask him, tell me a book of hadith, someone will say 40 hadith of Nawawi, someone will say Bulugh al-Maram, many would say Sahih al-Bukhari. Some Muslims, depending on where they come from, which their background, they may say Muwatta Malik. Muwatta Malik, obviously he died towards the end of the 2nd century, but the main books were put together in the 3rd century. And the greatest of the hadith masters, they lived in the 3rd century. So this man, ad-Daaraqutni rahimahullah ta'ala, he lived, he drank from the pond of that 3rd century, was the most pure water source that was known in the history of the scholars of hadith. That's number one. Number two is the continuation and further advancement of those things, those efforts, those sacrifices that were put forth in the 3rd century. And this is extremely important in 2017, not to become complacent, not to lose the sense of urgency, not to take your foot off of the gas, as they say. Those great scholars, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Fulan, this one, that one, what they did was stupendous. But we need to do even more. We need to go even further. We need to give even more sacrifice. And this, without any doubt, was the mindset of this Imam and the other scholars of hadith of the 3rd century. Afterwards, we have refinement and perfection. Pay close attention now. To refine something, something is crude, it's useful, it's valuable, it's beneficial, but it isn't refined. So when a product, when a substance becomes refined, then there are 20 more uses of that thing. 30, 50, 100 more uses of that thing. It's easily carried, it's easily transported, it is this, it is that, and the list goes on when we talk about the refinement process and the perfection of what those great imams started and did in the 3rd century. Another very important concept is remoteness from blind following. One of the most vicious cancers of the ummah today, unfortunately, is at-taqlid al-a'ma, is blind following. This imam was so great, he was so awesome, he was so intelligent, he worked so hard, he was so masterful how he put his book together, there's no need for me to think anymore. There's no need for me to use my mind that Allah clearly instructed and commanded me to use. So initially, it doesn't sound but so bad. If Imam al-Bukhari came, he compiled his book of hadith. Who am I to put together a book of hadith? Why do I have to travel and sacrifice and work hard? If Imam al-Bukhari came, khalas. Initially, it doesn't sound but so bad. However, Imam al-Bukhari, no matter how great he was a human being. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, no matter how amazing he was a human being. Imam Malik ibn Anas, rahimahullah ta'ala, no matter how knowledgeable and learned he still was from the children of Adam. So the scholars of hadith specifically, and the crucial, critical scholars in general. But we're here talking about scholars of hadith, and taqleed is like water and oil. They don't get along. It does not coexist. There is no such thing as taqdees al-ashkhas, as anointing and holifying someone in an individual. He's an imam, he's my teacher, I love him, I respect him. He was a great mountain. However, knowledge is open for all. So this is one of the things that led ad-Daaraqutni rahimahullah to be what he became, is because he was upon the hadith culture, fighting and going against taqleed al-a'ma, blindly following. Moving forward was the insatiable thirst and endless quest for knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ has told us, as Anas ibn Malik rahimahullah radiyallahu anhu narrated in the Mustadrak of Imam al-Hakim, he says, "Manhumani la yashba'ani, manhumun fi talab al-ilmi la yashba', wa manhumun fi dunya la yashba'." He says there are two people that have greed, two people that have large bellies, two people that have insatiable appetites, and they're never ever filled. They never get enough. The first is he or she who loves knowledge. He or she who is obsessed with ilm, and specifically the ilm of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, his ahadith. He says this person is never ever full. You go overseas, you study, you graduate, you teach, you have a masjid, you have a center, you're a doctor. The person continues to study. And this is one of the most striking factors of a true expert and a true master of knowledge, is that they continue to learn and they continue to practice. The Prophet, he then said, and the second individual, his lifestyle, her lifestyle is like night and day, totally contrast and opposite of the first. And that is someone who has a big belly for the dunya, for money, for wealth, for status, for power, for nobility. This person's desires can never ever be managed, period. You have a castle, I need a second. You have two castles, I need a third. You have gold, I need more than gold, and the list goes on. So this Imam ad-Daaraqutni rahimahullah, those who came before him, those who came after him, all of them shared the understanding, the appreciation, and the value of this golden hadith, is that one can never ever get enough of knowledge. One can never ever get enough of hearing Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's words. So just stop and just think. If the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam, if he came, if he was alive, if you were fortunate enough to sit in his company, could you get enough from looking at his face? Could you get enough from hearing his beautiful, sweet words? If you shook his hand, if you placed your hand upon his and gave him the bay'ah, would you ever get enough? Obviously, every Muslim is going to say no. And this is what the scholars of hadith were blessed with. And that is why that erudite Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, إِذَا رَأَيْتُ أَحَدًا مِنْ أَصْحَابِ الْحَدِيثِ فَكَأَنِّي رَأَيْتُ أَحَدًا مِنْ أَصْحَابِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. He says, whenever I saw a person of hadith, as if I saw one of the companions, as if I saw one of the Sahaba, because they are the people who live with the Prophet, who drink with the Prophet, who sleep with the Prophet, who fight with the Prophet, because all of his ahadith they have memorized by heart. Khairan inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are the main factors that were the biggest ingredients of the success of this Imam al-Haafidh ad-Daaraqutni rahimahullah ta'ala. So let's get started with his life bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Going back to the slide, his birth, upbringing, and early childhood. The first thing that you want to talk about and discuss any Imam is when they were born, where they were born, how they were raised, what was the initial environment. We don't have to give a lecture. We don't have to talk about the concept of the child and the importance of protecting the child at a young, tender age. And all virtue and all vice is instilled initially in the child. Courage, bravery, generosity, modesty, shyness. These things aren't learned when a child is 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. No, they're instilled in the child from a very young age. And the opposite is the opposite. So ad-Daaraqutni rahimahullah ta'ala, he was born in the year 306 of the Hijrah in the province of Dar-al-Qutn in Baghdad. Before you go any further, you see that he was born in the beginning of the century, which is historically important. And also, he lived in the Mecca of knowledge. He lived in the Mecca of Hadith. Iraq in general, Mesopotamia in general, of the ancient times and the later times in general, was the cradle of civilization. Let alone the cradle of Islamic civilization, let alone Baghdad. And this is why this city was given the nickname Ka'batul Ulum. They called it the Kaaba of sciences. Anything that you wanted, needed, desired was found in Baghdad, specifically a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And that is why Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, I went to Sham, I went to Hijaz, I went here, I went there, I went to this country, I went to that country. He says, and I entered Iraq several times. I went to Wasit, Mosul, I went here, I went there, Kufa and Basra. He says, وَأَمَّا Baghdad, he says, as for Baghdad, he says, then I forgot how many times I visited that city. Is a countless number of times that I went to that center of ilm. So this is where this Imam was born. So knowledge in general, civilization, culture, let alone hadith, was in his blood. It was in the air. It was in the water. It was in the food that he ate. And this is pivotal in him becoming what he became. Moving forward, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. After we find out where he was born, he grew up and was raised in a household with strong religious passion and practice. There lies no doubt that he was heavily influenced by his father, who was a traditionist, muhaddith. وَمَنْ شَابَهَ أَبَاهُ فَمَا ظَلَمَ, as the Arabs they say. They says the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And this is crucially important as well in 2017, is what example are you making for your children? What example are you putting forth for your sons and for your daughters? Are you leading them to the way? Are you making it available for them to learn and to benefit? Or are you forcing them? His father didn't necessarily force him, but he taught him and he made it available. So the first person that the child looks up to is the mother and then the father. The mother first and then the father. The first institute, the first school, the first madrasa, the first university that the child goes to is not the father, but it is the lap, it is the chest, it is the arms of his mother. And if you read the biographies of the great chambers of hadith, you'll find this in vivid description. Like Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Ahmad, not his father, but his mother, she was the one who said, go to and travel in Iraq. Go to Baghdad, go to this country, go there and study and seek hadith. She was the one who initially pushed him to become what he became, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala. Also, we have the very famous story that al-Khatib al-Baghdadi mentioned regarding a man who was physically deformed. He was very deformed, they say. And the narration, it says that the man's head was directly attached to his chest. He didn't have a neck. This is how he was born. Allah tested him with being in this unsightly form. So one day, the man who had no neck, he sat down, and as if he cried, or as if his mother cried, as if his mother felt sorry for him, she felt pity for him, and she looked at her son, and she said, "Oh son, anyone who looks at you makes fun of you. Anyone who takes a glance at you, he turns away instantly. They can't bear your sight." So his mother, she said to him, "I have an idea. I have a suggestion. I have something that may work for you." She said, "Go seek knowledge. Go study. Go learn hadith. Go learn fiqh. And perhaps the people will respect you. They may not like you. They may not love you. They may not adorn your form and your figure and your image, but they may respect you." So the deformed man, he went, he traveled, he studied until he became a master of knowledge. And then the Imam al-Khatib, he said that he became a mufti of Mecca. He became the head jurist of Mecca, and the people couldn't bear his sight, not because of his ugliness, not because of his deformed figure, but because the mahabatan lahu. They had so much awe and respect, we can't even look this guy in the face because he's so major. So just look at his story, and the one who advised him was his mother and not his father. Moving forward, he began seeking knowledge very early in his childhood and started to record and compile hadith at the tender age of 9. He enjoyed the experience of the traditional educational system of the Muslims at the time, al-Kuttab, in which they were taught the fundamental basics of the Arabic language, recitation and memorization of the Quran, Arabic poetry, and classic literature, along with being instructed in etiquette. His travels He followed the traditional practice of the people of Hadith and their insatiable thirst for knowledge and benefit in the following countries. Number 1, Sham, Syria. Number 2, Misr, Egypt. The reason why he didn't go to the other countries is that he had no need to, like Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Malik never traveled. Everything that he needed and wanted was found in Medina, was found in Hijaz. So therefore, how was he raised? How old was he when he started his knowledge? What did his mother do? What did his father do? What adab and akhlaq was he taught? Was he taught information before etiquettes or etiquettes before information? Moving forward, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, with regards to his life, his teachers, he relished the lavish tutelage of the great experts of his time. From them were, number 1, Abu Hatim ibn Hibban. Number 2, Abu al-Qasim al-Baghawi. Number 3, Abu Bakr al-Anbari. In other words, after the mother, after the father, after the initial school teacher, elementary school, middle school, high school, the influence comes from your sheikh, from your ustadh. How sharp, how smart, how dedicated, how devoted, how kind, how merciful your ustadh is going to have a direct impression on the student and the pupil. So ad-Daaraqutni rahimahullah, he enjoyed this blessing. He was spoiled in Iraq, in Baghdad, and he had these 3 Imams and many others who directly instructed him and taught him, and they showed him the correct way of Ahlul Hadith. Moving forward, his Aqidah. There lies no doubt or ambiguity that he was upon the creed of the pious predecessors, Ashab al-Hadith. From that which proves that is his masterful authoring of several scholarly works on theology, in which he trod the path of the people of Hadith, such as number 1, Kitab al-Ru'ya, Hadith regarding Allah being seen thereafter. Number 2, Kitab al-Sifat, Hadith regarding the various attributes and qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 3, Kitab al-Nuzul, Hadith regarding the divine descending. For one reason or another, there are those who falsely attributed him to the Ash'ari school. ad-Daaraqutni was never upon the way or the Aqidah of the Ash'ari. Hasha wa kalla, never. And those who say that, it's nothing more than a claim. It's nothing more than a claim. Those 3 books, among many others, clearly prove that he was upon the pure, organic creed of the early Muslims. Moving forward, his multiple fields of expertise. Not only was he a hadith master, not only was a muhaddith, a naqid, or a rahal, a ruhla, yurhal ilay, but he also was skilled. He also was talented. He also was gifted in other disciplines of al-Islam. Number 1, of course, hadith and all of its disciplines and branches, ulum al-hadith. When it comes to al-rijal, when it comes to al-ilal, when it comes to fiqh al-hadith, when it comes to ta'lif, tartib, when it comes to imla, the list goes on. He mastered all of those sciences pertaining to his main passion and love of hadith. Moving forward, modes of recitation, al-qira'at. He was a master reciter of the Quran. How many people today, if we stopped and asked the question, have the talent, the skill, the stamina, and the ability to take on these 2 major fields of Islam? Not fiqh, not aqidah, not seerah, but hadith and qira'at, from the most difficult of the sciences. Anyone who's memorized the Quran al-Kareem in 1 qira'ah, he knows is that there are countless ayat which resemble each other, which are similar to each other. One has a fi, one doesn't have a fi. One says, an, tajri min tahtiha al-anhar. One doesn't. So how do you keep all of the information in your mind, in your heart, accurately? And that's only 1 riwayah. So what about the other riwayat, let alone the countless names of hadith? This man, he mastered them both. Moving forward, ad-Daaraqutni rahimahullah ta'ala, he was also an expert in Islamic jurisprudence, al-fiqh. And the biggest proof for this is his book, As-Sunan, as we're going to explain. Number 4 is the classic Arabic literature and poetry, ash-shi'r wal-adab. It's well known, he wrote books, he put together things, he said things. He was an eloquent and fluid poet. His students, from the things which proves the greatness of a scholar, his teachers, his books, his travels, his upbringing, but most importantly is his intaj, what he leaves behind, his disciples. The disciple proves the strength or the weakness of the teacher. The disciple sheds light upon the devotion, the commitment, and the dedication to the cause of the teacher or the lack thereof. And we all know the importance of students in al-Islam. There were great scholars of Islam who lived before the 4 Imams. They lived before them. There were others who were contemporaries. There were others who came after them. And some of these Imams, whether you know it or not, despite popular belief, some of these Imams were greater than the 4 Imams. Some of these Imams were equal and similar to those Imams. From them is Layth ibn Sa'd, rahimahullah ta'ala, the great alim of Egypt, the one who used to debate with Imam Malik, the one who would write Imam Malik books, and the one who would also criticize Imam Malik. We're talking about on scholastic issues. Layth ibn Sa'd was so great, but how many people today are called Laythi or Sa'di? How many people follow his madhab, study his madhab, learn his madhab? But I'm sure if I called on the crowd right now, I could find 10 to 20 people who said, I'm Maliki. I've read the Muwatta. I've been to North Africa. I've been here. I've been there. I've heard of Imam Malik. The reason was not because Malik was so much better than Layth, but because the students, the disciples of Layth ibn Sa'd, they didn't look after him. They didn't take care of his knowledge. They didn't write down and record what he said. They didn't pass the baton. They didn't grab the baton. Layth ibn Sa'd, they used to say, كان أفقه من مالك وألزم للأثر ولكن أصحابه لم يقوموا به. They said he had more knowledge of Malik. He was closer to the Sunnah than Imam Malik, but his students, they quote unquote betrayed him. They didn't fulfill his legacy. Moving forward, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. From his students was al-Haafidh Abu Abdullah ibn al-Bayy' al-Naysaburi, al-Haafidh Abu Muhammad Abdul Ghani al-Azdi al-Misri, al-Haafidh Ahmad ibn Abdullah al-Asbahani. Obviously, we've run out of time. Moving forward to the next slide. His authored works. Not only was al-Haafidh ad-Daaraqutni a master memorizer, but he was also a high volume writer and a prolific author. In these short pieces of time and brief and humble presentation, let us suffice ourselves with the following books. Number 1, المجتبى من السنن المأثورة عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم والتنبيه على الصحيح منها والسقيم واختلاف الناقلين لها في ألفاظها, well known as as-Sunan. Number 2, العلل الواردة في الأحاديث النبوية, commonly known as ilal ad-Daaraqutni or al-Ilal. Number 3, al-Mu'talif wal-Mukhtalif. Number 4, at-Tatabbu'. Number 5, al-Ilzamat. Not only was this man a super duper memorizer, teacher, not only was he a major adherent of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but he was a prolific writer, a high volume author. And from the amazing works that he left behind are these 5. First and foremost is his book called Al-Mujtaba, which is commonly known as as-Sunan. Just like Abu Dawood, Imam ad-Daaraqutni wrote a book called Sunan. Just like the other scholars, ad-Daaraqutni, he made a major compendium on a hadith pertaining to the halal and the haram. We don't have enough time to explain that and go any further. Moving forward. His critical acclaim. Nothing strange about us hearing fragrant praise from various grand masters of hadith, from the east to the west, both contemporaries and those who came after him, in which they testified to his mastery of the sciences. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah, who's known from the east to the west, he spoke very highly of this great Imam. Obviously, we cannot read the Arabic right now. Last but not least was his death and burial. He died in the year 995 of the Common Era in Baghdad. Abu Hamid al-Isfaraini led the janazah prayer over him. He was buried in Bab al-Dir, gravesite in Baghdad. May Allah bestow immense mercy upon him and expand and illuminate his grave. Thank you very much for your time, for your attention, for your respect. Jazakumullahu khairan. May Allah allow us all to be hadith disciples.